A boring second act. This has become a cliche. But why exactly can the middle of your story especially become boring? And how can you beat second act problems forever? Hi, I'm Diana and this is Story Artist. Welcome to yet another episode of the Story Artist podcast, and we will be discussing principle number 6 of the Power of Storytelling series. And I hope you're excited because many authors are afraid of the middle. And there's really no reason to be, because if you can grasp the power of this principle and the simplicity of it at the same time, you will never again have problems with the dragging and boring middle, be it in novels, in short stories, even in emails where you're afraid that people just skim over the middle of your email and will never read the whole of it and so will never understand the ending. Which technique is this powerful technique and the simple technique to beat second act problems? This is the turning point. Let's define turning point first. A turning point is a time at which an important change takes place which affects the future of a person or a thing. Keyword is an important change. So something has to change and it has to be important. It has to have an effect, an irreversible effect on the future of a thing or a person. This is what it's all about. The turning point is about an important and irreversible change. What are the big 5? Especially in the 3-act structure, we have the big 5 turning points that have to happen in order for the story not to become boring. But you can actually use the big 5 technique for every aspect of your writing. Of course, if it's a very short piece of writing, you cannot bring in 5 turning points. That's obvious, but you can still work with 1 or 2 or 3 of them. But let's discuss the big 5 that are classically embedded into the 3-act structure and see what they're all about. You can use one of those or use several of those and integrate them into every piece of content you do, be it email, be it even a sales page, for example. Throughout the sales page, you can work with those big 5 turning points, considering your reader as the hero that you take through this structure. Let's look at those big 5 turning points. And number 1 is the inciting incident. It occurs roughly around the 10% mark of a story, and it sets stuff into motion. It's still not like the big turning point that is to come as the second one. It's only something that comes before a turning point to keep your reader invested into the story, to hint to this main conflict, but it's actually only a hint to the main conflict and brings in some new information or some change or some event that will get you here towards where you want him to go, to this second turning point we will talk about just right now. It's even if I say like the big 5, it's one of the smaller turning points of those big 5, because the next one is actually one of the biggest and the greatest turning points ever, and it's number 2. And number 2 is this main huge turning point, first huge turning point of your story. It occurs around the 25% mark of the story, and it's all about setting things into motion. This is also called the point of no return. So something happens, a new information or a decision or whatever it is that happens, that sets things into motion and introduces the main conflict and sets off your hero on a journey that he cannot go back to. So and it marks also the end of the first act and the beginning of the second act. Or some people like to talk in 4 parts, not 3 acts, and it marks the ending of the first part of your story. Because in the first part, we are in the ordinary world. We are talking about the ordinary life of your hero. And here at the 25% mark approximately, we have this turning point, this change that is the point of no return. It changes everything. And the reader or the hero or whoever the hero of your story is cannot go back to the ordinary life, because something has changed and has set things into motion, has introduced this main conflict and brought your hero on this path, on this journey that he has to go right now. And this turning point is the main turning point, that is the trigger, the main trigger for your whole story. Because if you look at how long the parts are, the second act is actually the longest act. And in order for it to get interesting and to become interesting, you need the third turning point that occurs roughly around the 50% mark of your story, directly in the middle of your story. You need to have a turning point that is surprising and that turns your story yet into another direction, introduces something new, something unexpected. And if you have this turning point, your story will not get boring. The problem with the second act is that there is no turning point. People are just moving, something's happening, but nothing turns the story around. And it's quite difficult because with the turning point before, the second one that we just talked about, you set things into motion. You say, okay, this is the path and my hero has to go this path. And so to introduce yet another turning point in the middle of the story means we'll have to get him from this path that you set him on. But this turning point is so important because it changes the way your hero looks at things. Consider it like this. So the first part or the first act of your story is the ordinary world, the normal life. The second part, everything that comes before the 50% mark is like the passive reaction of your hero to what he's been, he's just reacting to what people or circumstances or whatever is doing to him. So this this major thing happened that set him off on this path, but he still wants to go back. He still wants to go back home to his normal life, and he's just reacting. But at this 50% mark, something has to happen that sets him off to be an active part, to take matters into his hand. And I think this is why also many stories fail, because in the end we need an active hero, but he never reaches this point of where something happens that changes his outlook on this whole story, where he says, okay, I'm gonna act, I'm gonna do this, where he has this motivation to act. Most of the time we never have this thing occur, or it's not organic, it just happens, but it's not a major thing that we understand, okay, this is his motivation for going from passive to active. So you need this turning point in order to get your hero from passive to active. And the same goes for when you're writing a sales page or when you're writing a series of emails. You need something to happen, or you present the reader with new information or with something new that gets him from being passive and just listening to you and being maybe a little invested into your concept to, wow, okay, I want this. I want to be active. I want to do something. I want to be proactive with this, and I want to know how to do this. And if you can manage this, it's a huge thing. But don't forget, this is not how the story ends. And I think this is a problem with many marketers. They end the story with, okay, when the reader goes, okay, I want this, and this is where they end. But this is not the end of your story. There are still 2 more turning points to come. And number 4 is roughly at the 75% mark of your story. And this turning point also marks the lowest point of your hero. So he went from being passive to being active, and he's actually quite motivated, and you think, okay, he's gonna do this. And then something happens that gradually, one by one, up to this terrible turning point, brings him to his knees. And why do we do this? Because we need an emotional high to have an emotional low, and the other way around. If you want this emotional high to arise in your reader, if you want them to be glad, if you want them to have this tension, you need to introduce highs and lows. This is what we talked about actually in the last episode, and the principle number 5, pacing. If you haven't seen it, go back and look at it. It's also really, really helpful in order to understand emotional highs and lows. And this is why you need this turning point where you bring your hero to his knees and show him, okay, but everything is still bad, and you want the reader to be asking, how's he gonna get out of here? It's impossible. This is like the worst thing that could have happened to him. And you don't expect that, right? So you think, okay, right in the middle, he's like the hero and he wants to go. And this is where the real adversity comes into place. This is where, when he's motivated and he wants to take matters into his own hands, you bring up the real adversity. And guess what? With sales and with a sales page, for example, when you have this reader and he's motivated, he wants to take the matters into his own hands, if you don't bring up this adversity and this turning point, something else will. So if you want somebody to buy your course and you've got them to this point where they say, okay, wow, I want to have this, I want to do this, I want to buy this, something will come up that they will face adversity, be it financial reasons, be it their spouse saying, oh no, we can't afford this, do you really need this, can't you do it on your own, and stuff like that. So you have to think of the possible adversities and present the reader with them one by one, and ending with the worst one and saying, okay, how are you gonna get out of here? And this is where the tables turn and you present them with a solution. And this is where we go to the climax of the story and point number 5, turning point number 5. And I think this is where many people forget that there's actually a turning point due at the very end. They just go with the climax, and that's fine. And the climax is the rising of the tension, the rising of the, if we talk about sales and marketing, of the wish, the desire to get this product, to be involved in this course, and so on. But you have to bring in a turning point yet again to get the reader to the resolution of this. And this is a turning point where all the facts are on the table. There are no open questions. Everything is into the open. Every question is answered. And we're just realizing we're seeing the big picture. This is where we finally, when we look back at the whole story, we realize, okay, this is how it's been all along, and I finally understand it, and all the tension in this final turning point is resolved. So what kind of changes can those turning points be? Those can be a new reveal of information. So some new information enters the stage and we realize, okay, it has been different all along. Or we get, like, if it's a detective story, then, or a crime novel, you get new information from there, and a whole new angle opens up to you. So this is mostly something that especially happens in the very beginning. Those first turning points are those points where new information enters the scene. The second one is the turning of events. It's a very obvious one. So something happens that turns everything upside down. Somebody dies, or I don't know, somebody falls in love, or somebody is betrayed by another one. So like something happens, some action occurs, and it turns everything for the main hero. And the third one is a decision. So a turning point can also be a decision, definitely. It doesn't have to be this major thing of death or betrayal. It can be a simple decision of your major character to say, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do something that I've never done before, and go away from my ordinary world, my daily life, and try something new. So a decision can also be a turning point, but it has to be, obviously, it has to be motivated. It just can't come out of the blue, so you have to set up this decision. A turning point can also be a reveal of character. Those are actually quite interesting ones. So if you're writing fiction especially, you can reveal the truth about some characters. So someone we thought was a friend is in fact a foe, or the other way around, someone who we thought was an enemy is actually somebody who's helping us and can be our friend. And you can do the same thing with sales if you're talking about, like, say, some kind of products or some kind of stuff. Like when, let's say, you want to sell something that will help people be more productive and be less distracted by technology. And first we think technology is the enemy, but in your argumentation, in your turning point, you say, you know what? Technology is not the enemy. Technology is neutral, and it depends on what you do with it. And it can also be your friend. And this is kind of like a turning point, so where you start off with letting people think that something is like that, but then it's completely different. And this is actually something that is reserved for the latter turning points in the climax and in the absolute low point, is the revelation of some deeper truth. Especially in theme, and we're going to talk about theme later on with the principles. The revelation of a deeper truth is something that your hearer understands in the depth. It's some principle, it's some system, and it's actually, I think, also very important for sales that you let your reader and your customer understand some deeper truths, some principle you're building everything you're doing on your story, the story you're telling, be it with your fiction, nonfiction, or sales. Those are the things that we can use to create turning points in our stories. And I think this actually applies a lot to sales and marketing. Don't take your reader just there, but take them there with turning points. Introduce turning points into your sales pages, into your marketing, your blog articles, your emails, or your series of emails probably. Try to get away from this linear thinking. I think this is where we often stuck, especially when it comes to smaller things in content or to nonfiction and sales, that we say, okay, I want to get my reader, my marketer, my customer from A to B. And that's it. We draw a straight line from A to B and we're done. And this is why all of these things are actually sometimes so boring. And if you want to stick out from this, and if you want to do something different and get your reader through the middle of your sales page, in the middle of your email, try to think in a non-linear way. Try to think from, okay, I have A, I have B, and I want to get the reader, the customer, from A to B, but I won't do it in a linear fashion. I will go from A to C to D to F to E, and then I will go to B. Okay? And I think if you just switch this thinking a little, of, okay, I'm telling a story, I want to go from A to B. Yes, but how do you go from A to B? Don't go there in a linear fashion. Instead, introduce the big 5, or if it's a short content, 2 or 3 turning points, and decide where you're going to introduce them, what kind of turning points they're going to be, and how you can use them in order to still get your reader from A to B, but in a more interesting fashion. And I hope this was helpful, and I see you next time in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and to rate my show if you're listening on every podcast app, or if you're watching YouTube, please subscribe, and please let me know in the comments if you'd like me to improve anything. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I see you next time.